Hello friends, this is Hank with Ambient Glow Radio at noon, switching to a little bit of a day schedule. But today I'm going to talk about one foreseeable future. Now, facts do not equal truth, but we need to be realistic and we need to take a look at what's going on around us and understand what that means for our future. And we also need to understand historical cycles and how they apply, and also factor in what we've only really had for about 300 years or so, as far as electricity being on a global scale, maybe 200 years, being in a post-industrialist or a post-industrial world, which it's my belief that's where we're heading. So we also have to understand where there are breaks from that, those typical historical cycles due to an influence of new technology, and this new technology is the internet. The internet could go down. I don't think that the powers that be would want to bring it down because they're so heavily dependent on it. It's the best intelligence gathering apparatus that anybody could ever want. It's the control of that information. See, we living here at this time have more access to information from all around the world instantaneously that even kings would not have in the past. You know, for example, they would have to dispatch a sailing ship and wait years for it to return for reports, or rely on couriers or signals and letters and things of that nature. We can now actually communicate in an audio-visual format that is not really 100% reliable in its ability to actually convey a scene, but it's far better than, well, let's not say far better than, just different than, say, writing, because that leaves a little to the imagination and the poetic construction of the way that the language is used, or painting or music, for example. They're all different forms that we use to convey ideas to one another without having or utilizing direct telepathy, which can be done. It's been proven. And actually, where it was proven most definitively, was in a place they weren't actually looking for it. They weren't doing a study. But Sony actually had found that, well, they were gathering all the information from the data where people play video games with one another. And that data ended up reflecting that humanity, or humans, gamers, have an aptitude for actual being able to either have a slight clairvoyant sense or a telepathic communication between one another over distance. This has also been proven in a experiment they did between people in the United Kingdom and people in Australia. They were shown a large collection of faces in the UK and then one in Australia. And once one group was explained and pointed out like where all the different faces were, the other group was able to see more. It's the adding of the collective intelligence, the collective subjective unconscious that we're all really tied to as a humanity. So that's again why it's important to be looking after one another, because the health of one is really the health of us all. And the death of, well, I think you get where that could go. But we're now entering a time that's unlike any other. And people are still in, I guess, either confusion, denial. They're reliant on old paradigms, which are really not old at all. They're just old to them. The paradigm that most people are operating under is a relatively new one of the industrial period. Most of human history has not lived like we live today, nor has the environment been like it is today. And there are many reasons for this, but it's very important to pay attention to the environment first and foremost when you're taking a look at one possible future. Now, what I see is some very difficult Earth changes, which are going to put extreme pressure on food, but we have industrial capacity to offset that. So, but we also have a large population. We have a burgeoning and booming population around the world. Now, I believe that some countries are electing to deal with these problems in a variety of different ways. Typically, in a historical cycle, you'll find there's a cycle for war, there's a cycle for an economic refreshment, there's a cycle for the death of a fiat currency. The death of a fiat currency should be around 30 years. This one has been longer. Market cycle should be 7 to 8 years, but when you're in a managed economy like we are now, that is delayed. And when that is delayed, when those corrections are delayed, when it finally does correct, or when people look for real valuation, it's going to be wildly off by the time that those cycles were disrupted. We have been used to seeing, 4 seasons, or the moon in particular phases, all throughout the large majority of human history. And you look at the ephemeris tables, Columbus kind of awed the Indians with being able to predict a solar eclipse with absolute accuracy. And now today the ephemeris tables are off. And this is probably due to some gravitational influence on our solar system. What that might be precisely, I'm not sure anyone can say, although the speculation is that there's a brown dwarf star probably 4 times the mass of Jupiter with its own solar system in a way trailing it, because most star systems are at least binary, and it's possible that they're even trinary. It's possible our system could even be a trinary star system, but it's pretty much generally accepted at this point that it's a binary star system. And you have an outer sun with its own solar system that's following it, that comes around. It's kind of like links on a chain, with one link being on a flat plane and the other link being on a not so flat plane. So essentially you've got one that's going to come up like this and go out like that, and then just imagine this other one spinning like this. So it's difficult to conceptualize things in 4 dimensions for many people. So again, that's why I like the audio-visual format. Makes communication a little bit easier. But what does this mean? Well, we already know that the poles are shifting, okay? Which some people will say, well, that's only going to mess up navigation. Well, that's not really true. And if that were really, the case, then you could just use ground-based navigational systems instead of GPS. Like, take 2 bar magnets, for example, and put them, equidistant. The and then place your compass. Now your compass is actually going to balance in between those bar magnets, giving you a false north. Well, or the true north, rather, if you had two different poles. I mean, ordinarily you would have one and a north-south pole, but if you have two, then the compass is going to find that happy medium in between those two. Or if you think of a bar magnet, and the bar magnet, here's your upper field and here's your lower field, being one the positive field, the other being the negative field. For a long time, because that bar magnet was able to explain so much, being north and south, it was ignored in physics, the toroidal field. And maybe I'm getting a little off topic here, because there is a lot of information to try and understand. And I'm running out of tea. But it's more like a magnetic field is shaped like if you took a sphere and you cut it in half. So you have a bowl, basically. One bowl, which is positive on the top, one bowl that's negative on the bottom. And that's more like your a real representation of a toroidal field or a magnetic field, and it also explains a lot when you look at particle physics instead of using the standard model. That's why we talk about, or many people talk about, the electrodynamic universe or the electric universe as compared to a gravitational model, because if you examine magnetism, then the whole the physics of the whole thing kind of changes. And understanding that toroidal field is crucial to understanding magnetics. So, but of course, academia being what it is, you have so many people that are heavily invested in their ideas, and they spend a lifetime on it, and then they pat each other on the back, and they have tenure, and you know how people are, they just can't be wrong. And that's one thing about what appears to have changed since our greatest period, I think probably like 17th, 18th century, early 19th century, where we were really using science in the way that science is best applied, by observing the world as our Creator created, as God created, observing it, and then trying to understand creation. That's what science was about, was to try and test, to come up with a theory, and then make observations. And if the observations were repeatable, then you could say that that might be true, but you would always be open to the idea that possibly that you were wrong, because like with two bar magnets, you could see where it would explain, if you only looked at it in one way, everything appears to be accurate and normal, but add in another, and that it still presents the same observable result, but totally changes the dynamics of the entire model, if that makes sense. So science has to always be open to the idea of new, or open to new ideas. That's what it's about. You continually test your theories and not become too married to a single idea, because then you have no progression. And for a variety of reasons, these things have been censored and suppressed. And I think that since time immemorial, we've probably had the rod of rulership passed from one class to another in order to kind of maintain what they consider to be balance or order in the world. But again, this is cyclical. Freedom and tyranny. The Greeks speak of it when they talk about something called cyclical time, where it's not like we right now, living in the technological age that we are, the post-information age, it's not like we're at the pinnacle of human civilization. We're just simply in another cycle of it. So we'll be moving through this cyclical time again, where things get harder and then they get better and then people change. So because people are rarely ever influenced heavily enough unless they feel, unfortunately, a little discomfort or pain. And from an economic perspective, where we sit right now, plenty of people are feeling economic pain and hardship because they've taken the cycle that was supposed to end, the fiat cycle. Everyone knew this, that should have ended, and they've, for whatever reason, decided to prolong it. And this could be because of the earth changes. And then we see this excitement about World War III, which is probably just something that is going to keep the people agitated to the point that they're not able to engage their ability to critically think about their leadership, their environmental influences, economics, the economic factors of the future. And my main message here is the paradigm where you could go to work and save and then expect to retire and be fine on your own. You could live on your own. You could pay all your bills. That period is coming to an end, or has come to an end, or is at the end of its lifespan. Even possibly the idea of the nuclear family with just the two-parent household and the 2 children, or 3, or I think it's 2.1 children or 2.4 children, something like that. So those paradigms have shifted. How did people used to live in the past? Well, they lived more communally, not as communists, but more communally. Communism is where the state runs everything. Very different from communal living, which is more along a capitalistic model. I can't emphasize this point enough, because the state at this period really has gone mad with power, that it's a model that's doomed to fail. And for another, just to take another step aside, if everyone in the entire country, or even the entire world, paid 100% of what they earned to the government in taxes, they still could not balance the books. They don't intend to. They don't have to. So they don't. They don't run business. They don't look at things in a cost-benefit analysis. They don't use cost-benefit analysis because they believe they can legislate anything into existence as if they were gods, and they are not. So they will have to answer to the natural order of things, which is an economic cycle. So I'll show you just a couple of different slides here, so you'll know where to gather some information that will help you decide how that future is going to be for you. Now, at some point I can tell and discuss what my plan is, and then you can pick apart my plan, because I can see several different potentialities, several different ways it can go. So I have a plan for each one of those things. It's not really so much of an issue as to where it's going to go eventually. Eventually, there will be no life on Earth, but on what scale? Eventually, you'll die, but when? So you have to try and understand time as it is relevant to your situation. And then you look at the markers along that time period for the potentiality that something will unfold, and basically do your risk assessments. If this happens, then that happens, if then that, and so forth. And you go through the tree, and you're able to basically kind of see what's going to happen. And then the only trick in the end is to one, look out for the unknown unknowns, as Rumsfeld would say, and 2, timing. Timing is everything. So it's pretty, humanity has a tendency to repeat itself. History repeats itself. It might not well, it might not repeat itself, but it rhymes. So let me show you some quick slides here. Okay, this is One Pacific Redwood. And what he's showing you is about the precipitation and geoengineering, satellite geoengineering that they're doing. Another YouTuber that you can look at that'll show you all the ways that they manipulate the weather is Jim Lee. Now, I'm not going to play any of this video, but it's all very good stuff here. Well, actually, I'll play about 15 seconds or so of it.
But we do have rain scheduled for this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And up here we have a storm. This is 971 millibar. This is pointed up to the
All right, so you kind of get that this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm not going to give you sources that are no good. All right, let's move on to the next. This right here is Robert Dunn. I haven't seen him in a few days, so I need to look in on him a little bit here, because guys in the scientific community, as you should well know by now, are censored. Now, the whole psyop is that all the censorship is political, but it is not. If you have been around YouTube long enough, you know that it used to be like the Wild West, where anything went, any idea, any upload, unrestricted, and then, well, people were ripping off popular songs and trying to get paid for, you know, recasting those songs, and they were using all sorts of different search terms in order to make that possible, which is theft. Okay, people just were not able to act with any sort of dignity. So, but that was the first round of censorship. The second, that most people are not aware of, what was heavily censored was not politics. This is not political. It was the astronomy channels and a lot of the science that was hit in the first and earliest purges. All the UFO channels, all the astronomy channels, your amateur astronomers, they disappeared. Okay. Now this is Robert Dunn. I'll have to check on him, and maybe he'll bring us back some reports. But we'll play a couple seconds here.
Probably the big planet maybe that passed ACE on the 16th, October 16th, and has been still blocking the ACE data relays. We still have this is like midnight to almost 8, so it's almost an 8-hour gap still showing up on ACE on the data relays. And when I talk about,
so I know it's kind of hard to follow these things right now. You'll get used as you start to look at these bits of information. It'll make more sense. It takes a little time to try and start to understand these different instruments, and then also how those instruments are manipulated, smoothed out, and what the data means. Let's take a look at another. Okay, this is Astral Traveler. He was from far back in the day. He was looking at a low magnetic wave that was coming in. So he's got some very interesting stuff. He was one of the first ones that was really examining how the instrument data was aligning with work from astronomers like Farada, and let me look at my notes real quick here, because there's been astronomer. Basically, they told everybody about it in the 80s. There was a release of this information, and then they hushed it up because they didn't know what was going to happen. So let me see if I can find this list of scientists. Because I've been working on my own models to try and determine what the speed, once you're past the 40-degree angle on your magnetic field, what the time frame is that flips on a 360-degree, which I'm using a spherical model instead of, I'm just turning the Earth into a sphere instead of kind of it's a little bit more of an ellipse, but to try and determine basically scaling up the speed at which a magnet flips at past a 40-degree mark, and then scaling that to the Earth. Again, another aside, but anyway. Let's see. Oh, and I dropped my tea. It's going to be one of those days. This is an emergency, so I will have to interrupt the broadcast.